Up next, live from Philadelphia, we continue tonight's Pennsylvania primary preview.
Welcome to tonight's debate. We're live at the Harrison Auditorium of the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Pennsylvania has 178 delegates to the National Convention. 116 of them will be decided next Tuesday. It's a pleasure to be here because it's a chance to see the candidates up close and talk to each other, and a chance for you to decide on the candidates based on their convictions and their personalities and the issues that face them today in Campaign 88. Joining us tonight here on the stage of the Harrison Museum of the University of Pennsylvania, our guests, the candidates for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States, Governor Michael Dukakis of Massachusetts. And the Reverend Jesse Jackson of Chicago, who is late arriving and we hope will be with us in just a few minutes. This debate is sponsored by the Democratic State Committee of Pennsylvania. We'd like to especially thank Party Chairman Lawrence Yatch, Bill Batoff, who played a major role in making this debate happen tonight, Norris Weiss and the Executive Committee, and our executive producer Jay Newman of Channel 10. And now it is my pleasure to present to you the Governor of Pennsylvania, Robert Casey. Governor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Larry. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the presidential primary debate. As the Governor of the Commonwealth, I'm happy to welcome the Reverend Jesse Jackson and Governor Michael Dukakis to Pennsylvania. They're here to bring their message to our people, and we're glad that they're with us this evening. We appreciate the opportunity that this exchange gives us to hear firsthand their views on the challenges we face as a state and as a nation. And we welcome them proudly because as Democrats, they offer our people a vision for the future, a vision of change, and a vision of hope. Since the election of Thomas Jefferson in 1800, Pennsylvania has been the keystone in the Democratic arch, and it will be again in November of 1988 when we send a Democratic president to the White House. So Mike and Jesse, we say welcome and good luck.
Thank you, Governor. And now, Reverend Jackson. How are you? And now, ladies and gentlemen, the rules for tonight's debate. Each candidate will have about 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer questions posed by tonight's panel of reporters. There will be 1 minute to answer reporters' follow-up questions. The opposing candidate will have 1:30 for a rebuttal. Later, each candidate at the end of our broadcast tonight will have a closing statement. Now, earlier this week, we should tell you that representatives of the candidates took part in a drawing to determine seating and the order of questions and closing statements. Our panelists tonight, a very distinguished panel of reporters from throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Harvey Clark of WCAU in Philadelphia. Harvey. Karen Harch of WNEP in Scranton. Karen. And Stacy Smith of KDKA-TV in Pittsburgh, who will have the first question tonight for Governor Dukakis. Stacy.
Thank you. Governor Dukakis, your campaign has been based heavily on what has been termed the Massachusetts miracle, the conversion of a downtrodden economy into a booming one. Yet critics within your own state say that you have willfully misrepresented your record. For example, you point with pride that your state budget has been balanced during your years in office, yet you admit that your state constitution requires you to balance the budget. Others say that the full employment picture of Massachusetts is complicated, that $14 an hour jobs have disappeared and those workers are now forced to take minimum wage jobs. Still others say that many of the economic initiatives in your state were passed over your objections. Is it truly a Massachusetts miracle, Governor, or is it a public relations smokescreen?
Well, it's truly a Massachusetts miracle. Is there any doubt about that? Let me say this. In 1975, when I was first elected as governor, I inherited what can only be described as an economic and financial basket case. Biggest state deficit proportionally in the country, a state with the second highest unemployment rate in the nation, a state that was being called Taxachusetts, the new Appalachia, and a lot of other things. Now, no one person, obviously, is responsible solely for the transformation of that state. No one person can possibly transform the economy of the state of Pennsylvania, the United States of America. But it's been teamwork that has made the difference. And every team needs a quarterback, somebody to throw the ball, call the signals. That's what a governor does, that's what a president does. Yesterday afternoon, on the steps of my state capitol, I signed the first bill in the history of this country to guarantee basic health insurance for every single citizen in my state. That wasn't public relations, that was real achievement. But it came as a result of teamwork, the leadership of the governor, great support from the legislature, and great support from the business community, the labor community, the healthcare community, consumer advocates, people across the board who think it's about time in this country that we no longer tolerate a situation where 40 million Americans, most of them members of working families, don't have one dime of basic health insurance. And if I'm president in January of 1989, we're going to go to work on that and make sure that basic health security is the birthright of every American citizen.
You have a follow-up question?
I believe it was on March the 27th in the Miami Herald, a Democratic state legislator in your state stated that when Michael Dukakis walks down Pennsylvania Avenue whistling or humming John Philip Sousa tunes, the next governor of Massachusetts is going to be faced with a fiscal crisis.
Who was that legislator?
I do. I do not have his name here, but it's in my briefcase backstage. I can go get it.
I think it was a Republican minority leader, to tell you the truth.
Even if it was a minority Republican leader, sir, the question is, people in your state are saying that it's not as rosy as you paint it.
Well, we have a 2.9% unemployment rate. We have the fastest rate of growth in personal income in the country. We have more jobs than people to fill them. And we have taken our economic growth of those good jobs and we have brought them to regions and communities in my state that have been down and depressed for years. Now that's what I want to do as president. I want to work with Bob Casey. I want to work with Wilson Goode. I want to work with governors and mayors and business and labor and education leaders to bring good jobs at good wages to people all over this country.
You have a rebuttal, Reverend Jackson?
No, suffice it to say that when Democrats have the options for clean and good management, they can exercise it. The reality is Massachusetts has been blessed in some measure with a great set of universities there and a fair share of government investment. The reality is that should be happening in every state. And that's why I choose to reverse Reaganomics and not just manage Reaganomics. The governor of this state, if he had substantial investment, likewise could have a boom in Pennsylvania as well. And we got to make a fundamental judgment, as it were, not just to manage, but to reverse Reaganomics. We make a commitment, for example, to begin to rebuild bridges in this country. A bridge closes every other day. If we make that judgment, then iron workers and steel workers and engineers will go back to work. All of us can take the credit for it because all of us will be happy.
Karen Harch will have a question now for the Reverend Jackson. Karen?
Reverend Jackson, most people have to work up through the ranks to advance in their jobs, to advance in their careers, and finally make it to the top. Since you have never been elected to a public office, what qualifies you to hold the top job in U.S. government, the President of the United States?
I'm extraordinary.
In what way?
We're sitting here side by side, but we're not equal, because I've come from the furthest to get here. What qualifies you? Well, number one, a president must be old enough and American enough. But beyond that, you must be a leader. I know this country well. Why have I won from Vermont to Delaware, from Mississippi to Michigan, from Puerto Rico to Alaska, because I know this country. I come from the underclass. I've come from the very ranks up to near the very top. I've been identified with movement to make America better. We now have a public accommodations bill. I helped to make it happen. We now have the right to vote. I helped to make it happen. We now have open housing. I helped to make it happen. So in a real sense, some elected officials are not leaders, and some leaders are not elected officials. And I suppose there have been 4 presidents who were not elected before gaining the highest office beyond age and citizenship, and I have those qualities.
Follow up?
Yes, your campaign chairman strongly suggests that if Governor Dukakis does get the Democratic nomination, that he should choose you as his vice presidential running mate. Would you take that job? Would you want the job? Would you not take the job? What other options do we have for Jesse Jackson as far as the Democratic Party in the future?
It's a bit premature to be giving out coronation roses for the governor and taps for me.
Your campaign chairman said it.
We come into this campaign tonight after nearly 44 contests, and both of us have over 4 million votes. The governor has 172,000 votes more than I do after 44 contests. He has 30%, I have 29%. We're now moving into the last lap of a significant race, and I'm a long-distance runner. I look forward to it.
Governor, would you like to comment on that? Rebuttal?
Are you interested? Talk to me after.
You got it, Mike.
You know what I think is extraordinary about this, Karen? And I don't think anybody could have predicted this a year ago. The 2 remaining, and I guess that makes us the leading candidates for the Democratic nomination for the presidency, are the son of immigrants from Massachusetts and a black man that grew up poor in South Carolina. I think that says everything there is to say about the United States of America and our opportunity. I think it's terrific. I think it's terrific. Larry, let me just add this. Jesse said in New York the other day, and I thought it was as perceptive a statement has been made in the entire campaign, that both of us are people whose parents, grandparents, ancestors came over on the boat. Different boats, but they came here. And I think both of us believe very strongly that this is one nation, one community, one family, and the next president of the United States has got to be somebody that can unite us and bring us together. We both feel very strongly about that, and that's very important, I think. Very important.
Channel 10's Harvey Clark has a question for Governor Dukakis.
Governor Dukakis, you are known as a Northeast liberal Democrat, and assuming that you get the nomination, how will you convince a South, Midwest, and Western United States to vote for you, given the fact that the Reagan/Bushites love the current administration, both in 1980 and 84? Why do you think that anything is different today, and how will you convince someone to vote for you?
Well, 28 years ago, another son of Massachusetts ran and won the Democratic nomination for the presidency. They said he couldn't win in the South. They said he was too young. They said he wasn't presidential. They said his religion would be an impossible handicap to overcome. He ran against an incumbent Republican vice president, and he beat him. Needless to say, I hope with your help, history will repeat itself in 1988. And the reason John Kennedy won that election, because it was that he went to the American people with a message of hope, a message of optimism, a message of opportunity for the people of this country, all people everywhere. That's what I want to do. I've won in the South, I've won in the West, I've won in the Midwest, I've won in the Northeast. The other thing I would say, Harvey, is this. I'm not sure I understand the meaning of the words conservative and liberal anymore. We've got a bunch of self-styled conservatives in the White House who haven't been able to balance a budget in 8 years. If it weren't for Bill Gray, we'd be in even worse shape than we are. And I mean that. I mean that. There's no more conservative principle in the history of mankind than the rule of law. And I don't see much respect for the rule of law in the White House these days.
Governor Dukakis, you have not spent very much time in the city's minority communities, including right here in Philadelphia. How will you convince blacks and other minorities that you care enough for their vote?
Well, I'm somebody that has always had very strong support in the minority community in my contest for the governorship in my own state, the black community, the Hispanic community, the Asian American community. Obviously, Jesse has and will continue to get the lion's share of the vote in the black community, as I am getting the lion's share of the vote in the Greek American community. And for the same reasons. I'm being serious. Because our communities are very proud of us, and what we stand for, and what we've done, and who we are. But if I do win the nomination, I expect to reach out to all people, all communities, as I have during my entire political career. I'm very proud of my record as governor of my state, for affirmative action, for equality of opportunity, for full employment, for all people. And that's the kind of nominee I'm going to be. That's the kind of president I hope I can be.
Reverend Jackson?
I think it's fair, as we seek to bring the American people together, we should no longer regionalize our problems. For in some real sense, the success of the civil rights movement, a public accommodations bill, the right to vote, open housing, has made the South a better place, and the South has made America a better place. Our challenge tonight is to end economic violence, and that crosses lines of race and region and sex. The reality is 650,000 farmers have been driven from their land, and they have found common ground in the quest for economic justice. And so across the South, the real agenda of the New South is how can we raise minimum wage for working people? How can we afford pay equity and affordable salaries for women? A pregnancy leave for women? How can we have a National Labor Relations Board that is a mediation and not a strike-breaking board? And as people fight for education and health care, we're moving in a tremendous transition from racial battleground to economic common ground and on to moral higher ground. But what people realize is that when you lose your job, when you cannot get a scholarship, when your farm is foreclosed, the lights go out. And when the lights go out, you can't use region or race or sex or color for a crutch because everybody looks just alike in the dark. It's time for a new day. And that's what leadership must do, bring in the light of a new day. And so Mike Dukakis on my ticket will win the South.
Stacey Smith will have a question now for the Reverend Jackson. Stacey?
Reverend Jackson, you have repeatedly said that if you were elected president, you would take steps to reduce spending in defense without adversely affecting the American military preparedness in this country. What cuts, though, would you be making that would not adversely affect or impact employment in such areas as the Naval Yard here in Philadelphia, the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and high-tech industries in Massachusetts?
First of all, in 1981, President Reagan doubled the military budget by $150 billion, beyond our needs in the areas of excess. A $200 toilet seats do not make us more secure. Deploying Star Wars will not make us more secure. We're spending $150 billion a year defending Europe and Japan 42 years after the war. The reality is they're spending 20% less of their share 7 years later. Europe and Japan can better share the burden of their own defense 42 years later. I propose that we freeze the current military spending for 5 years. That does not mean reduce it, just freeze it where it is. We'll still almost be $300 billion a year. That would be a 10% cut over a 5-year period. That would reduce, by that time, we'll be saving $60 billion a year. We must reverse Reaganomics. if we're going to reinvest in America. In the state, the AIDS epidemic is at the level of requiring $10 million. The governor only has $350,000. The mayors haven't developed special protection for people who have AIDS. This combination of more services required on the one hand and less resources mean that we must change our priorities and invest in people and reinvest in America. And that will make America secure.
Follow-up question?
If you are going to reinvest in people, is that going to mean then that we're going to see more money spent on that and the budget going up also?
Not necessarily. If a pregnant mother has prenatal care, it will cost less than $900. If she does not have prenatal care and there's a low birth weight baby, it will cost up to $1,000 a day for 20 weeks. The fact of the matter is, Head Start, if one goes to Philadelphia High School for a year, is $2,600. Philadelphia Jail for a year, $23,000. I submit to you that Head Start, daycare, and prenatal care on the front side of life is more cost efficient than jail care and welfare on the back side of life.
Governor Dukakis, would you like to offer a rebuttal?
Stacey, the reality is that no matter who the next president of the United States is going to be, he's going to be facing what are essentially stable defense budgets for the foreseeable future. It doesn't make any difference which one of us is elected. And that means that the next president's going to have to make some tough choices. The kinds of choices Jesse talked about, the kinds of choices I've been talking about over the course of the past year. The president just submitted a budget a few weeks ago which proposed $6 billion for Star Wars and MXs running around on railroad cars. And we've got 2.5 million homeless people sleeping in streets and in doorways in the United States of America. Now, we've got to make a decision. Is it going to be Star Wars and MXs on railroad cars, or are we going to get back to building and rehabilitating decent and affordable housing for families of low and moderate income in this country? I don't think there's any question about what the answer is. I don't think there's any question about what that answer should be. And that's why this election is so important.
Karen Harch will have a question now for Governor Dukakis. Karen?
Governor Dukakis, you pushed for a plan in Massachusetts whereby plant operators would have to give a certain amount of warning before they would close a plant and provide extended medical benefits to the laid-off workers. That might work in Massachusetts, but here in Pennsylvania, it doesn't matter if a plant closes tomorrow or 2 months from now. We need the plants to remain open. What programs would you put in place to keep plants from closing and keep jobs in states such as Pennsylvania who have a big problem with unemployment?
Well, let me say a word about this because it's something I feel very strongly about. And I'm not sure I can do it in 60 seconds, so bear with me. You know, yesterday afternoon I signed that health care bill. On the opposite side of my state, the President of the United States in Springfield, Massachusetts, informed the American people that he was going to veto the new trade bill, a bill which I think is a responsible bill because it has a provision to give workers 60 days notice before you throw them out in the street. And he took the opportunity to do that in the only state in the country with a comprehensive plant closing law, which we passed with the support of labor and of business. Why? Because I said to my business leadership in my state, as well as to my labor leaders, look, I want workers to have notice. I want their families to have notice. I want notice. Because if Mike Dukakis or Bob Casey gets a phone call 3 days before the plant closes down, there really isn't much we can do. Thanks to that plant closing law, we have saved 220 companies and 20,000 jobs because we get notice early and we move in and help. "20 years ago, a respected labor economist co-authored a book on displaced workers in which he suggested that 6 months to a year notice ought to be required in order to help workers and their families adjust. His name was George Shultz. Maybe the Secretary of State and the President ought to have a conversation.
You have a follow-up, Karen?
Before he acts on that bill.
Governor Dukakis, farming is Pennsylvania's #1 industry. In the past, we've had several different federal programs designed to help farmers in the whole country. Some programs haven't worked, some have. Farmers, it seems, need help, some kind of help. What kind of help would you offer farmers, not only in Pennsylvania, but in other states as well?
Well, Stacy asked a question about cutting expenditures and making choices. You know, we're spending $26 billion a year in farm and food subsidies in this country. 6.5 times what we were spending in the Carter administration. And I don't know if anyone is happy about our agricultural policy. We're subsidizing the cost of food in this country to the tune of $26 billion. So we don't have to pay another 2 or 3 cents for a loaf of bread. I think it's crazy. I think we need a combination of supply management and reasonable price supports. We need an intensive effort to develop new uses for agricultural products, and there's a whole flock of opportunities out there. Biodegradable plastics, ethanol, road de-icers made from grain, all kinds of things that with some federal investment could open up new markets and new opportunities for our farmers. And we could save billions and billions of dollars at the same time. That's the kind of farm policy I'm for. That's the kind of farm policy I'd like to work with the Congressman.
Reverend Jackson?
A plant closing notice is better than not having plant closing notice. The fundamental issue is not to be notified that your job is going to end, that your plant is going to expand. And that's the fundamentally sound direction for us to go in. Some years ago, it seemed we were having our debates, and one of the competitors at that time gave the idea that Apple computers could not sell in Japan because walls are too high. The fact is, Apple made the decision to sell fewer computers at a higher price and get maximum profit with minimum workers. Toyota took another tack. They chose to sell more Toyotas, $2,100 less, and get more market share, keep their workers working, have less profit in the short term, but more profit in the long term. We must offer incentives to get companies to expand market share. When the dollar dips, it should not mean a dash for more profits on the quarterly basis. It should mean expanded market share. The second one is that we must shift the incentives from merging corporations, as the steel industry has done, purging workers and submerging the economy. The incentives, whether it is tax incentives or government contracts or downright presidential jawboning, should be to reinvest in America, retrain our workers, retool our factories, research and development. To know that we're going to die in 60 days is no real consolation. Know that we have a new 5 or 10-year contract, that's a real cause for celebration.
Harvey Clark. Harvey now has a question for the Reverend Jackson. Harvey?
Reverend Jackson, drug gangs are killing kids in all of our cities. And yesterday you toured one of the worst drug corners in America. And every city in America has a twin problem. Ironically, Attorney General Ed Meese walked the same path that you did 1 year ago, and 5 minutes after he left 8th and Butler, drug sales and drug traffic resumed. 5 minutes after you left 8th and Butler yesterday, drug traffic resumed. As president, what could you really do to take care of those problems in city neighborhoods?
First of all, the present program of the Reagan administration is to ask the First Lady to say, just say no, the President to just cut the budget, and Mr. Bush to just say and do nothing. We need to, in fact, if you're going to declare a war on drugs, know the nature of the war, hire the warriors, increase the budget, and pay for the fight. It does not start at A Street in Philadelphia. Drug trafficking is an international crisis. It's an aspect of our foreign policy, either the most inept dimension or the most corrupt dimension of our foreign policy. We had Noriega on our payroll, even as we knew he was dealing in drugs and hustling them to the Contras doing our bidding. First step is our government must break any ties with drug traffickers in Latin America. Point A. Point two, we need to have an international conference on drug trafficking with our Latin American allies. 3, a drug czar who has the authority between the White House, the Secretary of State's office, and Justice Department to consolidate our efforts to stop drugs. So cut it at the source, strengthen our borders, rehabilitation for those who are sick, education for our young, and then a leader who can inspire young America to resist morally and emotionally the temptation for drugs. So it's a government-people plan. But my view is a comprehensive way to stop drugs. It's a real war.
Harvey?
I'd like to ask you, though, how far you would go with that war. There was a time when the Reagan administration even said that it would use the United States military to get involved in drug trafficking. Would you go that far? Could you use the United States military if you were elected president?
There's no reason right now why we should not shift 30 or 40 ships, naval ships, under the auspices of the Coast Guard to better fortress our borders. Case in point, I went on a drug patrol with a Coast Guard group in Miami a few months ago. They identified where 85% of the drugs come through 3 choke points. They interdicted 10,000 pounds in 1986, 26,000 pounds in 1987, and then the Reagan forces cut the Coast Guard budget by $100 million. So they busted the Coast Guard and gave the drug traffickers a green light coming this way. Now, if we're going to defend our allies' borders in Europe and Japan and Korea, which I agree with, we must defend our own borders in Texas and Florida first.
Governor Dukakis, a rebuttal?
Well, let me say 2 things, one of which to emphasize what Jesse has already said. The greatest threat to our national security in this hemisphere is not the Sandinistas. It's this avalanche of drugs that's pouring into this country. But we've got to take it seriously. But we've got to take enforcement seriously and interdiction seriously, and work with our democratic neighbors and allies in Central and Latin America to stop it. On the other hand, as any good drug enforcement officer will tell you, if we don't do something about demand in this country, we're going to lose that war. We're going to lose that war. And that means drug education and prevention beginning in the early elementary grades in every elementary school in this country. That's where it has to begin. We've been doing that in my state for the past 3 years. It's making a dramatic difference in drug use and abuse among junior high school and high school students. But we need a president who's prepared to run and direct a national alliance against drugs. It brings drug education and prevention into every community and every elementary school, working with students and parents and teachers and law enforcement officers. If we aren't prepared to do that, we've got to stop talking about a real war against drugs. That's where we have to do it. That's what we have to do. And if we do it with a president who understands how you do it and is prepared to lead that fight, I think we can make an enormous impact and a real difference on the lives of kids all over this country and their families and their parents.
Mr. Cannon, I just must say this. I still think we're underestimating the impact of this war of the opiate on the American people. Even when we just focus on children and ball players, children are not buying $150 billion worth of drugs a year, and ball players who are high-profile catchers are not laundering that money. Bankers are. And this kind of money is being protected by forces and sources in high places. We, in reality, to piggyback on what Mike said, we have been programmed to run from 3 million Sandinistas behind 15,000 countries, but clearly cocaine, crack, heroin, PCP, and Saturday night specials are the #1 threat to our daily security on a daily basis.
Okay, before we take a break in tonight's debate from the University of Pennsylvania, I'd like to point out that our debate is being seen throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and America tonight. Our network includes WCAU-TV Philadelphia, KDKA in Pittsburgh, WNEP Scranton, WLYH in Lancaster, WTAJ in Altoona, WSEE in Erie, WTEM-TV in Elmira, and on radio, the Pennsylvania Network, and on cable around the country tonight, C-SPAN. Tonight's presidential debate from Philadelphia continues right after this.
There's a lot going on this election year, and there's a lot that C-SPAN is covering. Our weekly newspaper, the C-SPAN Update, lays it out for readers every issue in the campaign calendar. The calendar lists the network's plans for Campaign 88 from now through Election Day. In addition to Election 88 coverage, the update previews other major events our cameras record. Call toll-free 1-800-346-8800 to order the C-SPAN Update for $24. You can use your credit card, or we'll be glad to send you a bill. Call 1-800-346-8800 and you'll receive 50 issues of the C-SPAN Update. If you order an Update subscription now, you'll receive a free gift, the C-SPAN Road to the White House poster. This 22 by 28-inch pen and ink drawing attractively depicts C-SPAN's grassroots approach to the campaign. Call toll-free 1-800-346-8800 for your subscription to the C-SPAN update and the Road to the White House poster.
Childcare and its effects on the economy will be the topic of a speech by Secretary of Labor Anne McLaughlin at the National Press Club. During the address, the Secretary will announce the results of a study determining the roles of business and government in the child care issue. Following the address, Ms. McLaughlin will answer questions from members of the Washington Press Corps. Join us Saturday, April 23rd at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific Time on C-SPAN.
Next on C-SPAN, we return to our live coverage of the Democratic presidential candidates as they face off in a debate at the University of Pennsylvania's Harrison Auditorium.
At the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, their Democratic debate. And right now, Stacy Smith will pick up the questioning. He has a question for Governor Dukakis. Stacy?
Thank you, Larry. Governor, you're going to like this first part of this. Let's assume for a moment that it's 1989 and you were president. Three more Americans are taken hostage in Beirut. What would your policy be?
We've got to decide in this country whether we're serious about a tough anti-terrorism policy. And you've got to treat international terrorism for what it is. Crime, pure and simple. And you got to deal with it the way you deal with crime. With tough professional law enforcement, with undercover operations, with military strikes against terrorist base camps, if necessary. That's the way you deal with terrorism. The one thing you can't do is to make concessions to terrorists, ever. Now, that's a very tough policy. It's an agonizing policy. Hostages are taken, their loved ones care very deeply about them, want them back. But the reason the Iran-Contra scandal was such a tragedy for this country and the world was that we made the decision to deal for hostages. And the obvious consequence of that action, something that we're going to live with for years, is to encourage others to do the same. As a matter of fact, part of the discussions between representatives of the Reagan administration and people in Iran had to do with the proposed release of those 17 Arab terrorists from Kuwaiti jails. We were suggesting that. You cannot be serious about stopping terrorism with that kind of policy.
Stacey?
If I just heard you say, you said you would use the military to strike at terrorist bases.
If necessary.
If necessary. Doesn't this indicate then that we could be in trouble with other countries that may not necessarily want those bases there, but they're there anyway? I mean, in other words, you're now taking a strike against another country, not just the terrorist base, but you're taking a strike against another country.
Obviously, I'd like to work in concert with our allies, in concert with the international community. I don't know of too many responsible political leaders in this world who support terrorism and who wouldn't work with us. But what I am saying to you is that if we're serious about international terrorism, we've got to be tough on it. We've got to use those things which stop crime and break crime, and that may require strikes against terrorist base camps. Not against civilian targets, not attempts to assassinate people who happen to be chiefs of state, but strikes against terrorist base camps. Now, I think that a president who's serious about this can work with our allies and with the international community to mount a very serious international effort against terrorism. But what I am saying to you is that the decision in 1985, made by the president, apparently agreed to by the vice president, to deal arms for hostages, was the worst possible thing we could have done, and we will be living with the consequences of that decision for a long time.
Reverend Jackson?
South Africa has invaded every frontline state at least twice in the last 7 years. South Africa has bombed more than $25 billion worth of infrastructure of the frontline states. South Africa has parts of Angola occupied and Namibia and got innocent people incarcerated. Would you apply those same principles against terrorism to South Africa? It's a question.
You want to take his time to
I'd be
answer?
very tough on South Africa. Very tough on South Africa.
And would you apply the same rules of fighting terrorism as you would Beirut?
I would take action to impose tough economic sanctions. I'd work with those frontline Southern African states. I'd work with the international community. I don't think we have to lay out a menu of options here. I think we've got to be very tough on South Africa. We've got to make it very clear to South Africa that we won't tolerate the kind of conduct that government is engaging in. Now, there are a number of ways to do that. We ought to end this absolutely bizarre policy of ours in Angola, where we're supporting Savimbi, whose principal patron is South Africa, who's attacking American oil companies and being defended by the Cuban army. Doesn't make any sense at all.
Reverend Jackson, you have something else to say on
I
this?
think the real point is that we must be against terrorism, but measure terrorism by one yardstick, wherever it manifests itself. And part of the crisis in our third world policy is that we're incoherent on applying sanctions and our action against terrorists. South Africa is as official state-sponsored terrorism to which we are allied much too deeply. In Beirut, for example, clearly our intelligence should by now reveal to us where our people are. And there must be, of course, a recognition that our people are being held there really as an act of war against us. And therefore, our approach to freeing our people who are held hostage must be a part of the approach to free all of the Middle East from its present state of chaos and war.
Karen Harch. Karen Harch of Scranton now has a question for the Reverend Jackson.
Reverend Jackson, a recent statewide poll shows that your support here in Pennsylvania is dropping off. But it also shows that people prefer your stand on the issues. However, they say they would not vote for you. They say the reason is since the New York primary, they consider you a loser. How do you convince people that you still have a chance?
Well, first of all, people ought to vote conscience, courage, convictions, and if they do, they'll vote for Jesse Jackson. Or they will at least vote for the person of their choice. In reality, we come out of the New York primary. There were 8 or 7, and now there are 2. 170,000 votes separate Mike Dukakis and I. In terms of earned delegates, 137 delegates stand between Mike Dukakis and I. This is a neck-and-neck race. In some sense, the workers with whom I have stood, when I win, they win. The youth of whom I have challenged to avoid drugs and babies making babies and violence and suicide, when I win, they win. When I win, workers win. When I win, those who felt they couldn't make it win. Because when I win, there are no more impossible American dreams. Well,
You have a follow-up question, Karen?
Yes. But what if neither of you wins? What if neither of you has enough delegates at the convention and they happen to draft another candidate, such as a Mario Cuomo, perhaps? What happens then?
Well, it is not likely that you would go to a Super Bowl game and watch 2 teams that operated in the preseason, the regular season, and the playoffs, and go to the Super Bowl and see 2 other teams playing. It's not likely to happen. In some sense, people who accept the burden and the responsibility to take these risks and to accept this responsibility have earned the right to lead the party and to lead the nation. As for who may win or who may lose, no one knows that objectively. Democracy does not guarantee success. Democracy does not guarantee a win. It guarantees opportunity. And therefore, if we fight for opportunity and assure that, That's all that democracy affords us. And really, that's enough. Any combination on this stage against George Bush trying to defend Reaganomics and vetoing the Civil Rights Restoration Act and the drug flow in this country, we will beat the Republicans in November.
Governor Dukakis.
Let me simply add that I hope people won't spend too much time looking at the polls. Pollsters don't vote, citizens vote. And that's what's going to happen on Tuesday. And I want the people of Pennsylvania to make their decision based on which one of us they think has the strength and the experience and the values and the ability to lead this country, to build a strong economic future, to be our strongest nominee, to beat George Bush, and to be our best president. And I think it's very important that all of the people of Pennsylvania vote in this primary, that we have a good turnout, lots of participation, that people understand that they not only vote for us, they vote for our delegates. That's the important thing. That's the message that I hope both of us can get out to the people of Pennsylvania in the next 3 or 4 days.
Okay, Harvey Clark will have a question for Governor Dukakis, and the answers will have to be a little shorter because of time. Harvey?
Governor, if nominated, do you feel that a black vice presidential running mate would, as the polls indicate, hurt your chances of going to the White House?
No.
I think the question that most people would ask, even though the Reverend Jackson has said on more than one occasion that he's not running for vice president, but I'll ask you directly, if it comes to that, would you choose a Reverend Jesse Jackson as a running mate on your ticket if you were in fact nominated to the White House?
Are you interested? Let me say this. My job right now is to work hard to win this nomination. And it is by no means won. If I win the nomination, then I'm going to sit down and do the very best job I can to pick a running mate. I'm not going to rule anybody in or anybody out. The first responsibility I have is to work hard to win this primary, if I possibly can, in Pennsylvania on Tuesday, to go on to Ohio and Indiana and the other primaries. And if I wake up on the 8th of June or sometime thereafter and it looks as if I've won the nomination, then I'll do the very best I can to select somebody to run with me. But until that happens, I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about a running mate. I've got too much to do to go out there and do the very best I can.
Reverend Jackson?
It seems to me there's a great temptation to engage in a horse race analysis of what's going to happen on June 8th. And why not wait until June 8th? Because June 8th is coming. I want to keep focusing on raising a moral tone in this country, leading our nation beyond racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, escapism, and war, and make certain that the agenda items that we debate would be priorities. Stop drugs from coming in. Stop jobs from going out. Invest in people. Reinvest in our infrastructure. Reverse Reaganomics. Revive the hopes of the people of our nation and renew their faith. If that represents the agenda, when we emerge June 8th, we'll be a stronger and a better nation. At that time, we'll have a much better climate in which to choose running mates. I look forward to choosing a running mate. Might look forward to choosing a running mate. But however it goes, when it's all said and done and coming out of Atlanta, we will come out as a unit to send the Reagan-Bush forces back to private life.
Right now, we'll begin with our closing remarks, and by draw, we begin with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend Jackson.
On Tuesday, the 26th of this month, you'll go to the polls. For many of you, I fought for you to have the right to go to those polls. Exercise that precious right. Your vote will make a difference. Among us, there are distinctions, but not divisions. I do not want to manage Reaganomics. I want to reverse Reaganomics. The idea that the poor had too much money and the rich had too little, and therefore take from the poor and give to the rich, reverse Robin Hood, never was right. I want to reverse it. Leaders stand with people during a time of crisis and challenge. The shipyard in Philadelphia, I've stood with you, fighting for it and with you. In Homestead, Pennsylvania, shipbuilders, I've stood with you. In the Mon Valley, in Pittsburgh, I've stood with you. With our youth in schools, fighting for more scholarships and fewer loans, I've stood with you. In the hospitals, so many people are going there tonight, dying in admitting offices without a green or yellow card. You can't go upstairs to a bed that's empty, waiting for those with money or insurance to get sick. My friends, I've stood with you, and now I want you to stand with me. I want to make America better. I want to take us from a sordid history of racial battleground to economic common ground to moral higher ground. I know this nation well, and I know our world. I want economic justice in this country, and I want peace in Latin America. I want peace in the Middle East. I want to end the arms race, and I want freedom in South Africa. I want to bring that perspective to the White House. It will keep America strong. It will make America better. I'll give you a choice. You give me a chance. I'll make you a good president.
Thank you, Reverend Jackson. And our closing statement by Governor Michael Dukakis of Massachusetts. Governor Dukakis.
The people of Pennsylvania are going to have a very important responsibility on Tuesday. This is a very important primary. It's a key step on the road to the presidency, and I know and I hope that all of you will be voting and participating in that primary. For Kitty and me, this is a very special primary. We both went to school here in Pennsylvania. I spent 4 of the most important years of my life at Swarthmore, she at Penn State. So campaigning with you, working with you, winning with you is something we look forward to doing. I'm running for the presidency not because I want to be the great communicator, but because I want to be a great builder. After 7 years of charisma in the White House, I think it's time for some competence. And that's what I hope I can bring to the White House. I want to work with the Congress and the American people to build an economic future that creates good jobs at good wages for every citizen in this land and every part of this land. I want to build housing for families of low and moderate income and for young families that will end the shame of homelessness in America. I want to redeem a promise that Harry Truman made 40 years ago of basic health insurance for every single citizen and every family in this country. I want to wage a real war, not a phony war against drugs, with real enforcement, and with an effort to reach out to young people and their families and communities all over this country to do something about the demand for drugs before our kids are strung out on drugs and become so dependent on them that they can't get off. I want to take advantage of the best opportunity any president has had in our lifetime to negotiate for an end to the arms race and for deep cuts in strategic weapons and a test ban treaty and for reductions in conventional forces in Europe as well. I want to build an America that you and I can be proud of, the best America. America that doesn't hide but competes, an America that doesn't waste but invests, an America that doesn't leave some of its citizens behind but brings everybody along, an America whose best times are yet to come, and an America where the son of immigrants, with your help, can seek and win the presidency of the United States. Thank you very much.
I'd like to, thanks, buddy. We should have been doing this all along. I'd like to thank our candidates for making this a very special evening. I'd like to thank our audience for their participation throughout the broadcast tonight. I'd like to thank the Democratic State Committee, our fine technical crew led by our director, Greg Reed, our senior producer, Rick Friedman. Our thanks to the staff of the University of Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia Police Department, the U.S. Secret Service, and I think we really need, and I think out of the ones I've seen, this is one of the most spirited debates we've seen so far. A round of applause for our reporters here tonight, Karen Hart, Stacy Smith, Harvey Clark. And finally, for the men who made this possible, our candidates. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
You've been watching C-SPAN's live coverage of a Democratic presidential candidates debate sponsored by the Pennsylvania Democratic Party. This program can be seen again on C-SPAN tomorrow, beginning at 1:10 p.m. Eastern Time, 10:10 a.m. Pacific. Then join us Sunday at noon Eastern Time as the Democratic candidates face off in another debate, this one jointly sponsored by Carnegie Mellon University and the Tri-State Conference on Steel.